Imagine, just for a second, that you could perfectly reconstruct the most transformative era of your life. And I don't mean by digging through old journals or, relying on your own fuzzy memory.
Right, because memory is pretty flawed.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
is. But what if you could look at cold, hard metadata? Like every timestamp, every click, the digital footprint you left behind when you didn't even realize you were leaving a trail.
It's a completely different way to look at personal history.
Yep.
Because human memory is inherently self-serving, right? We smooth out the jagged edges, or we reorder events so our decisions make more sense.
Yeah, we retroactively make ourselves the hero.
We do. But metadata is entirely indifferent to your ego. A raw data export just records exactly what you were consuming, down to the second. So in a lot of ways, a timestamped music library is probably the most honest reflection of your internal emotional state at any given time.
Which perfectly sets up our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring this really unique piece of book marketing for David Ward's memoir, The Geography of a Life.
It's such a cool concept.
It really is. We basically have a backdoor into his brain during a massive life transition. We're looking at his actual Google Takeout music library. So this is a massive data set, over 2,000 dated track ads spanning from 2019 all the way to 2024.
Yeah, and out of that giant footprint, we are zooming in on one very specific listening peak. It represents a pivotal chapter in the book.
The Brussels chapter.
Exactly. We're going to walk step by step through his Brussels soundtrack, looking at the exact artists, the tracks, the podcasts he saved during the winter of 2020 to 2021, and decode how this audio fingerprint scores his search for a fresh start.
Looking at this data, to me, it feels exactly like looking at the rings of a tree.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, because it doesn't just tell you what grew, it tells you what the environmental conditions were. Like a dark, narrow ring tells you the tree was stressed, fighting off a drought or a fire. And this playlist functions as a chronological map of David's mental environment as he leaves this rigid corporate pharma job to find a fresh start in Belgium.
But the data actually presents us with this weird chronological mystery right out of the gate.
The 2019 track.
Yeah. The Brussels chapter of the memoir begins in December 2020. The narrative physically jumps from Ireland to Brussels. But the metadata for this specific playlist starts a year and a half earlier. The very first tracks he saves are from early 2019.
Right. You've got Dead Belgians, L'Amour Bon, Domenico Modugno's classic, which most people just know as Volaire.
Yeah, and Lauzerino's Algérie Mi Amour.
So wait, if the timeline of this fresh start officially begins in the winter of 2020, why is his musical foundation built on this bizarre mix of Belgian folk and French rap from 2019? That feels, it feels totally disconnected from moving to a new country.
It does, until you uncover the broader context of the memoir, because December 2020 was not his first time in Belgium. He actually lived in Brussels as a young man back in 2015 and 2016. And that first stint in Belgium was a profoundly grueling era for him. He was this young Irish immigrant working the high-pressure Irish pub circuit with friends like Shane Delaney and Alex, and he could barely speak the language.
I think he notes in the book he struggled just to order a coffee in French.
Right, so he's navigating this massive language barrier while working hospitality right in the tense aftermath of terror attacks in the region. It was an environment that essentially broke him down and eventually pushed him to leave Belgium for Spain just to recover.
So those 2019 tracks sitting at the top of the 2020 playlist.
They're musical artifacts. They're echoes of the first time he tried and struggled to make Belgium work.
I gotta stop you there, though, because it completely upends the traditional narrative of a fresh start.
How do you mean?
Well, we're culturally conditioned to think of moving abroad as this brave leap into the totally unknown. You pack a bag, move to a city where you don't know a soul, and bravely reinvent yourself. But if that first stint in Belgium sent him packing to Spain, returning to Brussels isn't a bold leap into the unknown. It's a retreat to the site of his previous burnout.
Yeah.
Why would anyone go backward to a place that broke them just to start over?
Well, think about the macro environment of the world in December 2020.
Lockdowns.
Exactly. The entire globe was essentially in lockdown. There was no romantic unknown to leap into. The unknown was everywhere, and it was entirely hostile. So when we face that level of global chaos, our psychology naturally demands a microenvironment that offers predictability.
He didn't need the thrill of anonymity. He needed friendly faces.
Right. He deliberately chose a place where he had connections, like Louis Linda Levan and Eric Jost, who was the bar manager at a spot in Louvain-la-Neuve. When everything is collapsing, you don't build a new house on untested soil. You go back to ground that caught you before.
even if that ground was difficult the first time.
Exactly. He needed the predictability of those relationships to gather his strength.
And you can actually see that gathering of strength in the metadata, because the data just simmers with those 2019 echoes, and then right on December 1st and 2nd of 2020, the playlist suddenly detonates.
It really does. The sound profile shifts radically.
Yeah, the acoustic tracks and French rap vanish, and it turns into this driving electronic house and production sound. We see Stan Kolev's New Moon, Capo's Necessary Evil, moods slow down.
Tim Ayer's I Want It, Ferric Dawn's Old Dollars.
It's just this impenetrable wall of rhythm.
And this sonic shift perfectly maps to his arrival in the town of Louvain-la-Neuve, which is a fascinating location for a memoir about starting over.
Because it doesn't have an ancient history, right?
Exactly. It's literally a purpose-built town created in the 1970s. It was invented to be a fresh start. So David is going to a town designed to begin again, so that he can begin again himself.
The psychological parallel there is just incredible, especially when you think about what he was running from. He had just left a 9-year career at Eli Lilly.
Right, and he wasn't just a low-level employee. He was a validation engineer in regulated pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Which means his entire professional existence is built on the concept that a system has to be perfectly documented and perform exactly the same way every single time.
Predictability is basically their religion. But the pandemic shattered that. His corporate world kept shifting. Company policies changed. Health insurance changed.
The moving goalposts.
Yeah. For an engineer whose job is to validate consistent systems, realizing the corporate house could just move the goalposts mid-game is a nightmare. The system couldn't be validated anymore, so he abandons it.
Which totally explains that massive wall of house music on December 1st. I mean, think about it like walking through a newly adopted city. When you're reeling from the collapse of a structured, decade-long career, you don't want singer-songwriters whispering lyrics at you about how to feel. You just need architecture.
That's a great analogy.
Right? Like a driving, wordless momentum.
Yeah.
You don't need lyrics to tell you what to think. You just need a beat to keep your feet moving forward while you figure out who you are now.
And in the memoir, David breaks his identity down into 3 parts: the founder, the producer, and the DJ. This explosion of electronic tracks reflects those producer and DJ identities. It's music engineered to move a room, and here it's acting as the engine for his own physical movement.
But clearly, his brain couldn't sustain that purely physical momentum for long, because we move into mid-December, and the playlist takes this wild, whiplash-inducing turn.
Here it does.
Mixed in with George Benson and Al Jarreau doing Breezin' and Saint JHN and Kanye West on Smack DVD, he suddenly starts saving these incredibly heavy, long-form podcast interviews from the Joe Rogan Experience.
The subject matter of those is so revealing. He downloads a conversation with astronaut Terry Virts talking about seeing Earth from space.
Wow.
He saves interviews with Hamilton Morris and Dr. Carl Hart, and interspersed with this heavy dialogue, you see Eminem Zeus and Nicolas Melon's boom-bap hip-hop jazz beats.
It is such a dense media diet. To go from wordless house music to these deep lectures on orbital mechanics and chemistry. What causes a mind to crave that specific, overwhelming level of input?
You really have to look at what he survived right before arriving in Belgium.
Okay.
He had just spent 16 weeks locked down in Friar's Lodge in Ireland, completely isolated from a paused world.
16 weeks.
Yeah, uncovering old stone walls, completely trapped in stasis. So sitting in Belgium, he is ravenous for a wider perspective. Keep in mind, David studied history and geography. His academic background is in Geographic Information Systems, or GIS.
So he literally maps systems.
Exactly. So listening to an astronaut describe the macro view of the planet perfectly mirrors his own attempt to map out the geography of his new life.
I have to ask you this as someone listening. Isn't it fascinating how when our own immediate world feels the absolute most chaotic and out of our control, we naturally gravitate toward content that looks at humanity from 200 miles up in orbit?
Oh, absolutely. It's a coping mechanism. We seek the macro perspective because it makes our own terrifying life problems feel small enough to actually manage.
We're looking for an anchor.
Exactly. And once he finds that footing, we see the timeline roll into January 2021, and this is where David's core musical identity really asserts itself.
The UK underground and alternative hip-hop.
Yes, but heavily spliced with a French influence reflecting his environment. We see Squidgy's Doo-Doo, next is Larry Tom right alongside Slow Tie's Inglorious, Code of the Friends Photo, and Verb T in Ill-Informed's Nobody's Perfect.
This specific collision of sounds, It really mirrors what's happening in his personal life, right?
Yeah.
Because this era is deeply intertwined with his relationship with Louisa, a Colombian woman he meets in Brussels.
Right. And what they do together is this quiet rebellion. Under the guise of tourism, they start walking Europe, practicing freedom in a lockdown continent.
Which brings up the most surprising element in this January data. Right alongside the UK hip-hop and French rap, there's a huge surge of football culture. He saves a 1988 video of Maradona singing and the movie Green Street Hooligans.
Because football is a core theme of the memoir. For David, it's his universal language. There's this unforgettable moment in the book where he's in Nice, France, recovering from a broken foot. He's on crutches.
Oh, I remember this.
He spots this diverse group playing football in a square, and he literally throws his crutches aside to play barefoot on the pavement just to insert himself into the game.
Because the moment the ball is in play, the language barrier evaporates.
Exactly. The linguistic deficits that haunted him in Belgium don't matter on a pitch.
Yeah.
And that same instinct is what will eventually anchor him when he goes to FC Sion in Switzerland.
It's like, if you look at his blend of British hip-hop, francophone rap, and football videos, it's just like a traveler packing a suitcase. He's keeping the core pieces of his identity, the wordy UK rap, while making room for the new languages and cultures that will define his upcoming journey to Amsterdam, Barcelona, and Rome.
It perfectly captures that psychology of adaptation. The Google takeout data provides verifiable proof that he was actively integrating who he was with who he was becoming.
It really is the footprint of a human metamorphosis. When you step back, this Brussels playlist isn't just a random assortment of tracks. It is the exact, verifiable map of a man detoxing from corporate burnout, returning to a familiar Belgian town to find his footing, and gathering the momentum to leap into the rest of his life alongside Louisa.
And this audio map is just one single chapter of the geography of life.
Yeah, this data is just the launching pad. I highly encourage you to read the memoir to follow David from those grueling doorstep sales in Cork to the empty stadium in Barcelona, all the way to a 995-kilometer walk on the Camino.
It's an incredible journey.
It really is. And it leaves us with something to ponder on our own. You know, we usually think of our digital footprints as things tech companies used to sell us ads. We view it with suspicion. But if a stranger looked at the exact timestamps of your music library during the hardest, most transformative month of your life, what story would the data tell about who you were trying to become?